Good morning, Fraser. Welcome to my podcast, One For The Road. It's a real joy for me to have you on today. We met at a boat party and we had a little chat and I thought, you know what, this is the man to get on. So how are you doing today, mate?
I'm all good, Dave. Thank you for having me on. I said to you before, it's one that I listen to quite a lot. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be on here.
Yeah, how many days are you alcohol-free now?
Oh, so at the end of this month, it will be 10 months. So coming up to a year.
10 months, that's fantastic, mate. Right, I'll tell you what, mate. Let's just pause it there. Hold on. Carry on. I just want to make sure that I've got the mic on the... Yeah, she can edit that out. 10 months is brilliant, mate. And you were a pro footballer. And I was just saying before this interview that I was a football manager for 10 years. And our team were a youth team, like kids team, which my son played in the Tandridge and District Premier, which was a really, really high standard. And a lot of the kids were scouted for teams like Fulham, Chelsea, and the pressure on the kids, but also the parents as well, because my son was a left footer, right? And England had this whole thing about a left-sided player. So they were looking for kids like George, and he was quite a big kid as well, so he was strong. And at each game, they were saying, let's get your kid down to Chelsea. And I held back because I didn't want to put him under that pressure. But I've seen the parents go down that road as well, where they talk about it. And my son plays for Chelsea when they're actually going to the academy for 16 weeks or whatever it was. And then they would get a letter through the post saying, we no longer need your child. So see you later, sort of thing. And the kids were like gutted and crying. And so there's such a lot of pressure. Did you find that growing up?
Yeah, it's something that I work in football at the minute. So a lot of my work involves educating parents, educating young players, working within the academy. So I still have that passion for football, but it probably does stem from me going in there as that kid. I think a lot of people... I was born, 20 minutes away from Chelsea Stadium. I'd say 75% of my schoolmates all supported Chelsea. So when I became the kid that signed for Chelsea at 9 years old, I think you'd assume that I was probably this confident young lad, like Mr. Popular in school. Complete opposite for me. I was quite introverted. I didn't really want everyone knowing that I played for Chelsea. If I joined in the playground, everyone wanted to break my legs because they were a little bit jealous that I was the kid at Chelsea. And I think because I was a Chelsea fan and I was obsessed by it, I was so in awe of that environment. So I'd go in there and, you have first team players sort of when you trained at Cobham, which would have been on the weekends, you had first team players that would come past you and, you'd have like Zola walking past you and like all my heroes. And for some of the other kids, they reveled in that, but I was sort of terrified. So it was a pressurized environment for me. I was always really scared of making mistakes. So that would mean that I'd probably hide a little bit, go into my shell. It is slowly changing. And I think it needs to, because it was such a tense and, intense, serious environment from an early age. And football from the age of, 9 up until 14, whatever it is, should be about fun. It should be about development, but it should mainly be about fun and enjoying it. And for me, I look back and I wish I'd have enjoyed it a little bit more.
I hear you. And that is part of the reason that I kept George away from it, because he used to love his football. He used to play Saturday and Sunday. So all the pressure of these scouts and they would gather around me about, oh, Joey this and, and to be honest, some of them did go to the academies and it changed them. It changed their whole game because not their fault, but they thought they was above the other kids. So that sort of broke the team up a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Mm. But what I found later when we went through the different ages is when they got to 14, 15 and the girls started coming into it and drinking at an early age, that changed direction of them as well, because you had a couple of them that really dedicated to the training. They'd be always turn up early for the game and be kicking the ball in the corner, you know, and be right on it. And you get the other kids that would turn up that have been in the academies, and you could tell they weren't focused. It's almost like, oh, what am I playing for this team now? You know, and then when the booze come in, that, you know, going to the parties, that, you know, and that changed as well. And did you keep yours? I've heard, I think, that you was a late starter with the drinking. That you was it 17 that you started?
Yeah, about 17, 18. And it's interesting you say that, actually, because there's a lot of stuff in my childhood that I've started to go back to when I've gone sober. And then I remember there was a lad on my estate, and it was a council estate, and everyone played football. Farrah Williams grew up on the estate, and she went on to be the England's highest ever capped female player. So she went on to be a big sort of superstar in the women's game. But we had a lad called Ronnie Fletcher. He ended up having a non-league career, but he was at West Ham, you know, growing up on, you know, in a big team. Like, I think he won the Youth Cup and was going to be sort of this big star. And I always remember when he was about 22, 23, and he's quite a bit older than me, but he'd always say, stay away from girls, stay away from beer. And there was another few people that I bumped into that always sort of drilled that narrative into me. And then I didn't like being around sort of drunk people as a kid. So when I signed for Chelsea and when I had this dream of being a footballer, I remember so clear. I even remember where I was, and I must have been 6 or 7 years old, but saying, like, I will never, ever touch a drop of alcohol. And I never once sort of was even tempted throughout my early teens or when my schoolmates were doing it. It was never a sacrifice. I never felt like I was missing out on anything, because I felt what I was doing was exactly what I wanted to do. So it didn't require any sort of willpower or anything like that. I missed out on all these sort of social situations that other friends went into. And as you say, when lads do turn, you know, 14, 15, 16, sometimes they do, you know, go off into that path, but I didn't at all. I was completely obsessed and driven by football.
And were you judged by your mates for not drinking?
Yeah, I think in school especially, so at Chelsea, you end up getting a day release from school. So 1 day a week or 2 days a week at school, I'd be taken out at half day, and then you get to go in and train at Chelsea. So you'd have a couple of days a week where you do that. Then your whole weekend was taken up by football. So we train on a Saturday, play our games on a Sunday. So I just didn't have any kind of time to go to these parties. If there was one on a Friday night, I'd be in bed training the next day. If it was Saturday night, I'd be in bed, you know, game the next day. And yeah, you were judged a little bit because you're missing out, and you get the odd comments and things like that from from your school friends. But again, I was really comfortable with that, because I felt what I was doing was better. I felt like what I was doing was going to set me on this different path from what they were doing, which was, you know, experimenting with drugs and alcohol. And they come in on the Monday morning, loads of good stories and what they've been up to with girls. And, you know, I was not experienced, you know, with anything like that. But again, I still didn't feel like I was missing out on anything at that age.
So at what point did that change for you?
Yeah, that changed when I left Chelsea. I signed for Brentford, so I got released by Chelsea. I went to Brentford, and when I left school, all my schoolmates went one way and I went the other way. So lost contact with all of them. Literally had no friends from school, because I think at one point they ask you to go out with them and you say no that many times that you stop getting asked. But my new social group and my new mates were all my new teammates at Brentford. And they still are. So we're still very close. Two of them were best men at my wedding. I've got one of their stag do's this month. So I'm still really close with them, and I bonded with them instantly. But that was my new social group. So when we started going out to parties, when you're 16, 17, 18, it was surrounded by people that were like me. They were never going to touch drugs like some of my school friends did. They were disciplined, they were focused, but these allowed themselves to have a drink at the weekend and sort of be a normal teenager on a Saturday night, maybe. And I started going along to these parties, and, you know, I'd had that really strict environment at Chelsea. A lot of these hadn't. They played sort of grassroots football. Brentford weren't the most professional environment at that time. So they probably had a bit of a looser time, and, you know, were drinking probably when they were 15, 16, but not heavily, just, you know, socially. And I'd start going to parties with them, and, you know, you go, and I think there was me and one other that would be sober. and you'd see them all drinking, talking to girls, dancing, having a good time. You come in on the Monday morning in the changing room, and they've all got these stories of where they ended up and what they did. And a part of me then started feeling like I was missing out. And part of me then felt my schoolmates were not succeeding at anything really. But these lads that were playing football, some of them would be the best player in training on Monday. And I felt, I've gone to this party, I've not drunk, I've probably felt a little bit awkward and boring, not really spoken to any girls. And then on Monday, I'm not the best player in training. These are. So I felt like if they're being able to get away with both, then I'll give it a go. And I didn't drink for the first sort of probably 6 months of that. Going to these parties, I was always the sober one. But then I remember taking the first drink, and sort of this big cheer and everyone patting you on the back, sort of welcoming you in. But I did feel that it gave me that confidence boost. I was very shy, introverted. I'd never really socialized with girls. I went to an all boys school, which compounded that. But then when I did take a drink, I felt a bit looser. I felt a part of the gang. I felt like I could dance. And I did feel guilty the next day. I remember going for a run, putting a bin bag on, trying to sweat it out, because I made that promise to myself really early on that I'd never drink. So I had a lot of guilt there. But it did just sort of linger around, that guilt. But I became more comfortable. Right, 2 days of the month, I'll go out and I'll drink. So after a game, Saturday night, party with the boys, I'll go and have a few drinks, and then that'll be fine. So that's where it sort of 17, 18 years old is when I first started, really.
It's accumulative, isn't it? And it's like it's where you draw the line. And so when you start introducing like the 2 nights in, you kind of believe that you get away with it in the end, and you don't even think about it, do you? I mean, I was never at your standard and long shot, but I've played some games, like really important games, like semi-finals of the cup. Literally, after being in from a club at 4 o'clock in the morning, it was a 10:30 kickoff, and standing on the pitch thinking, I want to throw up. You know, it's horrendous. So, going through your career, where did you go from there?
From Brentford, so out of that youth team, I was actually the only one that got a professional contract. So part of it was I was really obsessed, and I probably did more than some of the others. I weren't the best player, but I was more driven than a lot of other players. I went from there. I played for AFC Wimbledon, which is quite interesting because at Brentford I was this shy lad that started to drink, started to become more social, that kind of thing. But at Wimbledon, I could no one knew me there, so I could almost invent a new identity. So when I started going out with them, they only knew me as this confident lad on a night out, because over the last couple of years, I became that on a night out, became quite extroverted, felt more confident with the girls, that kind of thing. So you almost develop a new character when you sign for a new team. But I went from there, AFC Wimbledon, I played for Welling United. So that was a drop down for me. I had a bad injury and had to play part-time for a year, which was difficult. And then I did really well there, and Luton bought me. And that was a big move for me. And that was sort of the kickstart of my career. Played for Luton, played for Stevenage, and then ended up at Newport County in Wales. And that was the final club that I had.
And you had a big game, didn't you? It was at a cup game, Man City.
Yeah, so there was like a bit of a running joke in my family, like when you played at the level I played, which was like League Two, you probably get 1 or 2 live games every year on Sky or BT Sport or whatever it is. I'd always have an absolute stinker, always. Don't know if it was like the nerves or the pressure that got to me, and you start thinking about things that you never really think of. So my mum would come and watch me at a game, or a couple of mates, family members. But when you're on telly, you'll have all these distant friends, you'll have family that you don't see very often, you'll have teachers and people that have sort of followed your career from afar. They all watch you for that big game. And every time I'd have a shock. I'd score our own goals, I'd get sent off. So we got drawn in the FA Cup against Leicester, which was a massive one for me. And it was a BBC game, so it was a prime time. And everyone else in the team was over the moon, because they were thinking, right, if I do well on BBC, I'll get a move. And, if I do well against Leicester, I was the opposite. I was like, God, this game's going to be on telly. Everyone's going to watch me here. get run around by Jamie Vardy. But that game I actually did really well. I got man of the match. We beat Leicester, and that set us up for a game against Man City in the last 16. So I never thought I'd get to play against a team like that, the level that I played at, a million miles away from the standard of Man City. But we did really well. We were 0-0 with them at half time, and then they sort of showed their class and beat us 4-1. But that was actually the last game that I ever finished, and sort of my career was ended a few days later, which was
it's
which was quite
devastating,
bizarre,
mate.
yeah.
So a few days later, you were laying in bed, weren't you? And you started having palpitations and.
Yeah, I played a league game on the Tuesday and had to come off because I didn't feel right. So my legs went, felt ill, felt like I had the flu, and it was the next day that I was laid up in bed. And yeah, just I did feel like I was coming down with the flu, so I didn't think too much of it. And then yeah, heart started going, palpitations, and left it, and then by the end it was, my heart was beating that fast. It was sort of shaking the bed. And my wife was pregnant at the time, so I didn't really want to panic her. But I said to her, when it got later on, I said, "You're gonna have to take me to the hospital here." And then she knew something weren't quite right there. And yeah, they took my blood pressure, and I sort of had a bit of an episode in the hospital. Don't remember too much. Put on drips, and I stayed in the hospital for about 10 days. I did loads and loads of tests, and it felt bizarre. It felt like a bit of a whirlwind that I didn't know what was going on, because a few days before I played that Man City game, and then I'm in a cardiac sort of ward on the NHS, and anyone that's been on that, I was in there, and then every other bed, so there's probably about 10 other beds on my little ward, everyone else is 70, 80 years old, and you're in there thinking, I've just played against Man City last week, and these lot have got like oxygen tanks on their backs. They're talking about they've smoked for years, they've drunk for years, they've abused their bodies. I was like, why am I in here with these? Like, no disrespect, but yeah, after about a week in hospital, I had a team of doctors that sort of surrounded my bed, and they just said, look, what we've seen here, it's not safe enough for you to continue playing football. And the advice after that was, if you stop playing now, we don't think you'll need open heart surgery and a valve replacement. So that was the advice, and I stopped. It was, you're meant to get regular checkups, and that happened. But about 18 months ago, I went back in for a check, and they said, look, I do think you are going to need this open heart operation. And it links to alcohol a little bit, and we'll come on to it in a sec. But when you have this operation, you go on blood thinners for the rest of your life. So you can't drink alcohol. That is one of the big things. There's certain foods you have to avoid, but you cannot drink alcohol. And at this point, 18 months ago, I was probably in the height of my drinking. So my first question was, they said, you're going to have this operation. I said, what does that mean? I can't drink anymore. And that was literally the first question I said, not like, what does this mean for my life going forward? Can I do this? Can I do that? And I remember the doctor saying to me, he was like, I didn't think that'd be the first question you asked, but no, this means, you can't have, you can probably have one drink, because any more than that, your blood levels will spike. And I remember driving home and sort of thinking to myself, I was in a bit of denial at this point, but I knew I had some kind of issue with alcohol that I didn't like. And I remember sending a message to my mate saying, they reckon I was going to have this operation in a year or two. So I said, I've got a year or two before this operation. Let's get as much in as we possibly can. Let's get loads of nights out. Let's enjoy it, because I ain't going to be able to do this again. And in my head, it was like, right, I feel like I've got an issue, but in a year's time, I'll probably have to have this operation. I won't be able to drink again anyway. So I'll stop then. But in the meantime, I'll just, I'll go.
Go out in glory, basically.
Yeah.
It's mad, isn't it? Our, like you say about that question, does that mean I can't drink then? I've asked that. Like, I had an appointment with the doctors, and I was petrified, because I'm 58 this year, but at 50 you get like an MOT. And it's like not a mandatory thing, but it's a free thing on the NHS that they and I was thinking, well, what are they going to find in my liver? And I remember for 5-6 days I was so petrified at the call from the doctors saying you need to come in. And they did say you need to come in, but they wouldn't turn me on the phone. And when I went in, they said, "Oh, your cholesterol's a bit high, but apart from that, all good." And I thought, how can it be all good if I'm drinking like I'm drinking for years? I couldn't understand it, but it that almost gave me a ticket to go, well, you can carry on like this, because if you've got away with that, then you're going to continue to get. It was a weird mindset that I went through in that. So after that, then when you come out, you kind of in your head, you thought, right, I've got a year to drink. How bad did your drinking get?
It started off. So my relationship with alcohol towards the end of my career was, the guilt went a little bit as I got older, but still football kept me on the straight and narrow. I was really professional. Watch what I ate, watch what I drank, but I probably gave myself a couple of weekends where I'd have a little binge. I'd maybe start having a little bottle of wine with my wife at home and a few beers. But one thing I'd never done was I never really kept alcohol at home. If we had a bottle of wine, we'd bring it in, we'd drink it, but there was never like a, fridge full of beers or a cupboard full of wine or spirits or anything like that. But when I came out of playing, I remember just getting like a crate of beers and putting them in the fridge and thinking, like, it's a Tuesday night. I've never been able to do this before. Like, just have a beer on a weekday because I've got training the next day. Don't have training tomorrow. And one thing was, I was really anxious about what I was going to go into next and worried. I wasn't really prepared for coming out of the game, when I did. And I had that chatterbox in my head that was constantly yapping away at me in the evening, saying, what are you going to do? Panicking. My wife's about to give birth. I've only ever earned money through football. Don't know who I am. Don't know where I'm going to live. I was living in Wales at the time, and it was just non-stop. Couldn't sleep. But when I had a couple of beers, that voice just disappeared, and that was like a coping mechanism for me. And those 2 beers turned into sort of 4 or 5 and probably 6 or 7 in the evenings. And it just put me in like a little zone where I just zoned out. And my wife, because she was pregnant, she'd go up to bed a little bit earlier, get tired. So I had a bit of time on my own in the evenings I really started to enjoy. And then when I became a dad, that time was probably even more precious, because I'm trying to do everything I can to start my next career and be a dad. I didn't feel like I had any time for myself. So those evenings were like, right, unwind, have a few beers. And if I'd had 3 or 4, 2 or 3 beers, my wife wouldn't say anything. Or if my mum was coming over to help, she wouldn't really say anything. They'd say, like, you've never done this before, so enjoy it. But when I started having 4 or 5 and 6 and 7, I remember just getting like a nagging voice from them. Are you opening another one? And that just used to drive me mad. And I'd get all defensive, and I'd be like, I've never been able to do this before. Just let me, give me a break. And that led to me hiding alcohol. So I was like, right, if they don't say anything when I have 3, I'll just let them think I'm having 3. And I'll put 1 in the freezer for when she goes to bed. I'll put 1 in the garden. I used to put loads in the garden. In the morning, loads of bottles. I'd get up before anyone else, take them to a different bin, which was around the corner. We lived at the time on like a little new build estate. So there were little park bins and stuff like that. One of the worst things was, there was a Sainsbury's local about 30 seconds up the road. So if I ran out, and once I started drinking, I did not want to stop. So if I ran out, I could just walk 30 seconds up the road without anyone knowing and bring another 1 back, or bring another 2 back, or pretend to take the dog out for a walk. And I started doing that, and it started getting heavier and heavier, and the guilt massively sort of piled on. I felt sluggish in the mornings. I didn't like looking in the mirror. I weren't looking after myself sort of physically. If I drank, I ate awful. So I'd have a pizza, a microwave meal, a load of chocolate, get up the next day feeling horrible. But on the outside, I was functioning quite well, because I'd still get up early. I was still sort of working really hard during the day for my career. I'd still take my little girl to the park and try and play with her, even if I didn't feel great. So people were looking at me going, flipping, oh, he's done all right since he's come out of football. He's doing well. But inside, I was hiding so much. And I'd have these little spells where I'd work away. So I'd go to a hotel for a couple of days. And that for me was like paradise. And my drinking I didn't want to be around anyone, just wanted to be on my own. So I could lock myself in a hotel room, watch the telly, do whatever, and drink as much as I wanted without having to hide it, without anyone nagging me. And I'd black out in these hotel rooms, and I'd go out on my own at night looking for a bar to just sit in on my own. And yeah, I just keep waking up the next day just so confused as why I kept doing it, but I just could not stop at the time. And it was, yeah, a big release for me.
It's like a mission of self-destruction, because when you say that, I used to go away just for a night away, just to change of environment. And I used to take extra clothes to wrap the bottles in. So I would say it was, say for instance, Premier Inn. It was in the middle of nowhere, and they always had a little pub connected to it. So I would go shopping, and I would buy a litre of vodka, 4-pint cans of Stella, some crap to eat, and I'd have a separate holdall for all this, but wrap them all in like clothes, so that when I booked into the hotel, they weren't clanking around. Go in the pub, have a meal, and then 4 pints of Stella or whatever. But previous to that, I would line everything up in my room. So when I got back, I would like hunker down, and I knew I was in for a complete session without anyone judging me. Oh my God. And then pass out basically, and wake up in the morning and think, God, how is this a break? I feel absolutely horrendous. But then I had all the evidence from what I had, like Tasmanian Devil. I'd gone through the whole lot. And then it's like, how can I get rid of this? I even tried to look under the bed. It's awful. I know I'm embarrassed, but trying to find a place where I could hide the empty litre of vodka, where I literally drank it like water. Then I went to the bin there. And then I went to a, like, as you say, like a little Sainsbury's, like, and put one in there, and just to gradually get rid of the evidence on the way. But as like on the outside, now people have said, I didn't even know you had a problem.
Yeah.
But it's in your mental health, the shame you feel, and it's like, what, especially like you being like a professional footballer, you're at the top of your fitness and mental health as well, I imagine. Like when you were flying and everything was going well for you, probably things couldn't be better, and your lovely wife and child and whatever. And then you go and do that. And it's like, why do I want to be on my own? Why do I want to bury this, that, and what? And even now, I'm not sure I even know why.
Yeah, I couldn't understand it. Mine was, it was to quieten that chatterbox. I think one of the things I couldn't understand was that I didn't want to go to a pub. I didn't want to go out with my mates. That weren't really like an appealing thing for me. I didn't want them to know that how much I was drinking. And that element of being judged for what you're drinking. I remember I'd put something up on, when I had a drink, I'd go in this little zone where I'd do things that I would never do sober. So I'd send a message to someone. The next morning, I'd be like, why on earth did I send that? Or I'd post something on social media thinking, what are you doing? Or I'd buy stupid things on like online shopping and not have a clue that I bought them until they arrived. And I'd be like, where does that come from? And this honestly, this used to happen like so often. And I remember putting something up on social media of just like me with like a pint or something like that. And like a couple of people messaging me back going, it's a Monday night. And I was like, oh, like, don't other people do this? And I was getting like a few comments like that. And then the other thing that was tripping me up a lot was, I think because I hadn't been around the lads like in the changing room, and I've missed that side of it. Anytime I went out socially, I just got so excited. So if I went out with my friends, I didn't want anyone else to go home. I was drinking before they got there to get myself in the mood. I was drinking on the way back. If I went out with my wife, even, I was always like the sensible one when I was playing. I had to go out quite a lot sober when I played. But when I came out, it was like, all right, this is my time now. This is my time to enjoy myself. And I was embarrassing her in front of her friends, and we get into arguments. And alcohol, looking back, was the only thing in every single aspect or every single issue that I was having. Alcohol was, central to it. I didn't pay attention to it. And I've heard a couple of people talk about this, that they try and eliminate everything else. I'll try and go to the gym, I'll try mindfulness, I'll try and meditate or watch my diet. But alcohol just was like, it's like, right, that's staying, because I can't be sober because that is boring. Like, that is a lesser life for me. I want to have fun. I want to unwind. And for me, alcohol was key to all of that. So that's what probably kept me drinking. A stereotype of it will be boring, but also a bit of denial of, I'm still doing all right. Like, I'm not drinking as much as he's drinking, or I'm not drinking as much as she's drinking, or can't be an alcoholic because I don't drink, spirits. I don't drink every day. I don't look like, I'm not scruffy on the streets, and just all these like stereotypical alcoholic images that you grow out of in your head. But if someone had said to me at the time about sort of grey area drinking or sober curious and all these little things I've sort of looked into since, I just ticked every box. So I was going on Google, typing things in, what is an alcoholic, guilt after drinking, like all these little things. So even though I was in denial, I was curious about my drinking and I didn't like my relationship with alcohol. And I do think a lot of it comes from that guilt of not wanting to drink as a kid, the guilt of this isn't going to be good for my football career, the guilt of I don't like who I'm becoming. I had so much negativity surrounding alcohol. And I'm just so fortunate and so lucky that I did recognize the issue when I did.
I mean, and there's the other thing as well about your career ending early, because I know professional boxers that when their careers ended and they're not getting up at 4 a.m, road running and training, and that huge adrenaline rush of walking into the ring, and when that's over, I know a couple that have died from alcoholism because they completely have gone back into their shell and they don't know how to deal with it. So was part of that, do you think, did you feel like any resentment for your career? Because you were 28 and a lot of people, they go until 35.
Yeah, it's a really good question, that, because I went into a role that kept me involved in football after that. So pretty much as soon as I came out, I was still going and watching games every weekend. And I felt a bit of resentment. So I was 28 and I was watching other people. And at first, there's a bit of a novelty when you come out of it. So you can start doing things. You get, there were initially weekends where I had spare time. And at the time, a novelty was being able to drink and eat what I want. And I couldn't do that during my career. So at first, the first couple of months, I was like, I actually quite enjoy this retirement. But then, I did get that resentment. I was like, why? How comes these can still do it and I can't? And I carried that with me quite a lot. And it does. You go into that sort of self-pity, self-loathing. But then, I think once I stopped drinking, and it probably is once I stopped drinking, it took me that long. I started to look back and think this could have happened when I was 16. They could have diagnosed me at 16 and said, you can never kick a ball again. And I look back and I had a 12-year sort of full-time professional career. And I'm so lucky that I got to do that. And it did end probably 7 years earlier than I wanted to. But I look at it now and I'm like, I now have a 7-year head start on these lads that are still playing, because they'll go through their own difficulties. Hopefully not as bad as I did, or not with alcohol, but the statistics are quite shocking in professional sports. Players coming out, going into gambling, drug addiction, sex, gaming's a big one.
Online shopping, where they buy things and don't remember
it. Divorce rates are huge, bankruptcy is huge, and a lot of these young lads, like I was, have been known as the footballer since the age of 8. So if you go from 8, some retire at 38. So for 30 years, your whole world has revolved around a Saturday match day. Every relationship you got, everything you eat, everything you drink, then all of a sudden it's gone, and you don't really know who you are, because I didn't really separate the person from the player. And I think it's so important that you do that. You leave the player at the door when you go home. So for me, my career was so up and down and inconsistent, and I put it down to that when we won a game or when I did well, I was up there, I was sky high, it was the best thing in the world. But when we lost, it was like drowning your sorrows, and you wouldn't want to leave the house. And alcohol probably did creep in a little bit towards the end of my career with that, because if I had a bad game, I'd go home, or I'd be like, right, I'll get on the coach and be like, right, who's out? I need to forget about this. And it was a coping mechanism. And then if you've won a game, it's like, right, who's celebrating? And alcohol's involved again. So looking back, it was present probably more than I thought in my career, but just didn't really notice it.
It's interesting, mate, because whoever I talk to who come for one-to-ones with me, right, the first thing they say, I'm in an industry that alcohol is everywhere. I'm in a career that, and I say to, well, look, every career, because we are surrounded wherever we look by that. So when it comes to stopping, how did you deal with that?
So I got in touch with, probably about 6 months before I stopped, I got in touch with Sport and Trance. So they were set up by Tony Adams, and they work in professional sport. So because I'm a member of the PFA, you qualify for, I think it's 12 counselling sessions. So I phoned up the PFA, and I was in a really bad place, like mentally, and it was so much worse on a hangover the next day. Like the feeling I had, this was awful. I remember phoning up the Sport and Trance on a hangover and saying, look, I'm really struggling. Don't know what to do. I'm unhappy. I'm drinking heavily. I just need a bit of help. And I'd never had any kind of counselling before. And I went and spoke to someone. And if I'm honest, I just did not click with this counsellor. I came away feeling more frustrated than when I went in. So I stopped after 2 sessions, went back to drinking, forgot about it. And then it crept up again, and I got in touch with him again and said, look, I'm struggling, nothing's getting better. And at this point, the same point, I'd had an argument with my wife on Father's Day of all days last year. And I can't really remember it, but I'd gone to bed really early. And instead of letting me go to bed, she came upstairs with my mum, and they were just like, what is going on with you? Like, every sort of social occasion at the minute, you're falling over, you're drinking, we're arguing. And I just broke down. And I've never really sort of cried in front of my mum like that, but I remember sort of sobbing, just saying, look, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm drinking heavily. They both had no idea that I was hiding alcohol. So my wife had no idea. And my mum said, I have seen signs of this. Like, I've seen you when we're having a barbecue, you're going around the corner and sneaking another beer, or so she'd seen little bits of it, or she'd always comment, God, you drink so fast. Like, you're drinking 3 by the time anyone's finished 1. But I remember I broke down to them. I got in touch with a new counsellor, and she was amazing, a lady called Mandy, who specialised in alcohol. She's a former alcoholic, or recovering alcoholic, whatever term. She was amazing, and it completely changed my perception of counselling. I was like, it does actually work if you get the right counsellor. And then I had about 2 weeks where I didn't touch a drop. And then I was like, right, I'm cured. Like, I've learned my lesson. And I said, right, I don't want to not drink at all. So I'll have a 2-drink rule. So I'll go out and I'll have 2 drinks. And that lasted me about a week. And then I was like, right, maybe a 3-drink rule, because maybe it takes me that 3rd one to get a little bit merry. And then that went fine for another week or so. And then I had 1 day out with 2 friends, went into town, and I think I must have had my 3 drinks in the first hour. Someone put another one in front of me, and I was like, oh, go on, I'll have another one. And that night, there were shots involved, all that kind of stuff. And I fell over, and I remember losing my wallet. And I got in, and I saw sort of the look on my wife's face. And I've never felt guilt like it the morning after, because I'd opened up to her, I'd got help, and then I'd just gone straight back to what I was doing. And as I said, I felt horrendous on the hangover the morning after. And I went for a drive. I had to actually work the next day. And looking back, I'm ashamed, because I probably was over the limit. It was about 10 o'clock the next morning, and I got in at 2. But I listened to a podcast of a former cricketer, and I'm not a cricket fan, but I was working with a sports agency at the time, looking into agents. So I literally typed in on podcast, sports agent. He was the first one that come up. I listened to his life story, and he's 10 years sober, gone through this trauma. sounded exactly like me as a young player. The pressure he put on himself, he felt like he was a pressure cooker, and alcohol became his release. Bit of trauma, lost his identity, and then the difference in his life now he's sober. And I've still got the messages on my phone that I sent my wife that morning, and it was like, I feel like I can't moderate. I feel like I said, I'm quite sad, but I know that I can't drink. I'm not like normal people, or that's what I said in the message. And yeah, I listened to that. I carried on with my counsellor, and I said that I'd take a break for try and get to a month. And that was a long, long month. Like, I was nailing non-alcoholic beers. I was nailing chocolate. And that time that I was sat in the evenings overthinking, I was just trying to fill that any way I could. And I was in a real low mood for that month. So I can understand why people want to, think, oh, this ain't for me, because it was a tough month. That after probably 6 weeks, 8 weeks, I started exercising more, started eating better. My relationship was better. My job sort of picked up. My mood was lifting. And it just, every day just seemed like there was a new thing that was sort of unfolding. And I'd say I got to, initially, after about 2 or 3 months, it was only my mum and my wife that knew anything about this. And I was like, don't tell anyone, not my brother, not any other family members. I was so ashamed to say that I had some kind of issue with alcohol. Because this is another thing, my mum and my immediate family, I hid that I drank for them until I was 24. So every family party, I'd be sober and say that I didn't drink. Anytime I went out with friends, if there was a photo or a social media post, I'd hide the drink behind my back, because I never wanted my mum to. She'd sacrificed so much for me to become a footballer, took me everywhere. I didn't want to throw it in her face by not looking after myself properly. So I always hid my alcohol from them. So when I came out about 6 months in, and I went on to TalkSport, there's a presenter called Jim White that's 10 years sober. He said, come on, I think your story is really powerful if you're willing to share it. And I opened up on that, and that was sort of a game changer for me, because I started becoming sort of obsessed by this alcohol-free world and the community that I found. People like yourself, I was desperate to listen to podcasts and understand a little bit more. And I think that community aspect of it is massive. Like, if I hadn't listened to that podcast, if I hadn't then sort of searched for things or found other people that resonated with me, there was a story that you said about, I think you said you were cooking at home and there was bottles of wine there that you were going through. And I remember listening to that, and I was like, I've done exactly that. And I'm not the only one going through this. And you've managed to get sober, and other people have managed to get, and they just kept looking for these stories and found it so helpful. I didn't go to AA. I didn't define myself as an alcoholic, but I found a community. I found Instagram really powerful. I found podcasts really powerful. And yeah, after 3 or 4 months, everything just sort of clicked into place. And it was like an enlightenment, really. It's like you found out something that not a lot of people have found out. It feels like you've got a little hack that other people haven't got. And I now have been given like a massive buzz and a massive purpose that was missing when I left football, of people getting in touch with me, people resonating with my story. And I look back and I'm like, that podcast pretty much saved me, probably saved my life, my marriage, my, everything like that. So if I can do that for someone else, someone can listen to this and hear something, then that is the biggest sort of purpose that I could ever want.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And it's planting one seed in one person's mind that can change. I had a woman come up to me just before Matt Pink's boat party where I met you. And she said to me, you won't know who I am, but you replied to a message on Instagram. And I've said on here before, I always go out of my way to respond to everyone, because I think it's important, because people are reaching out. For me to just not bother is I'm, not living up to my responsibility there. But she said, one thing you said to me was you were never too old to change your life, and she's now 2 years sober. And it's incredible, but it's the ripple effect that it can have on their marriages, their relationships, their families, the whole thing, and for you, what are you? How old are you now?
I'm 31.
Oh, 31. the work you can do in this community is incredible. And you're such a humble, lovely man as well. And people resonate. I mean, the story you've told today was basically me, like the hiding and the binging. And it was me coughing when I'd open a
Oh my
can.
God.
So,
That is exactly what I used to do. Honestly, exactly what I used to do.
yeah, it's mad. And you think you're getting away with it. I had a
Mm.
friend that would drink 6, 7 cans of Guinness and say, Guinness doesn't smell, so she doesn't know I'm drinking. And I'm like, are you having a laugh, mate? I can smell alcohol a mile away now, and I hate it. I absolutely hate the smell of it. But as in your career, so what are you doing now to do with your football career?
So I work so part-time I work as a scout, so a first team scout for a championship club. So I'll do their Northwest recruitment. So that gives me my football buzz. So I'll go to 2 or 3 games a week, under 23 games, first team games. And that is my sort of passion for football still. And then on top of that, I've got a company that I run called B5 Consultancy. And we work with the majority of Premier League clubs, championship clubs, clubs in the Football League, in WSL, in different sports. And we'll educate on off-field behaviours. Originally, it was a lot to do with social media. So we found that a lot of players were, especially young players, sort of coming through and making mistakes on social media, or how they were representing the club when they were away from the club. But it's completely this thing that I've gone through with alcohol free and my drinking now has been taken into football. So I go in and I'll talk about escapism quite a lot, because a lot of these lads are looking for that. There's a lot that are away from home, away from family at a really young age, and theirs might not necessarily be alcohol, but it might be, you know, a multitude of other things that they go to switch off and to get rid of that voice. And I'll mentor a few players at different clubs. So I've got that going on. I've got the scouting going on, and this new world of sort of the alcohol-free space is something that I really want to explore. It does give me a real buzz. You know, I love reading about it. I love talking to people like yourself. I'm the same as you. If someone messages me, just the feeling I get from being able to be on the end of that. I've had players that I've played against. So some in particular that are like big, strong men that look like they have not got an issue in the world. Some of them multimillionaires, played in the Premier League. They've reached out to me and told me how much they're struggling. And I'm like, wow, I never would have expected you to be like that. Yeah, you're absolutely in unbelievable shape. You've got a bloody mansion, you've got a beautiful family. But this, you know, alcohol does not discriminate. Like, no matter what sort of stage of life you're at, how rich you are, poor you are, male, female, it's an addictive substance, and so many people lean on it for different things. So I look back at myself, and originally it was for social confidence. It was to talk to girls, it was to dance. Then it went from sort of that was sort of a pleasurable thing, and then it went to like masking pain. It was like, how can I get rid of this pain short term so it would just disappear? And I think that comes in so many different forms. And I want to go in and sort of take what I've done in sport and, you know, take it to other areas. And I'm so passionate about it because I go into London, or I'll go to, my wife's a singer, and I'll go to bars. And in particular, men, I think, you know, I want to help, because I think a lot of young lads go through what I went through, like really awkward, socially awkward, go to alcohol as a sort of coping mechanism, and it stays, and it gets worse. You drink heavier. You know, I've seen people go off the rails, become violent. You look at some of the stats in sort of sexual assault and crime and suicide, huge. Like, there's so many different areas it affects. And one thing that's really powerful for me is not necessarily the person getting in touch with me that is drinking, but their family members, and realizing how many people it affects. And actually just realizing, when you start looking at different books and listening to different people, just how ingrained it is in society, and like how it just is an everyday part of your life. And there was a post I put up yesterday about Jack Grealish, and, you know, Man City have just won the Premier League, and he's a young lad, and I've been that young lad that's just won promotion, and you're on top of the world. And that, I want it at much lower down. He's won the Premier League, but he put something up what's everyone drinking tonight? Beer, Jaeger bombs, or nothing, I'm boring. And I'm like, that is nothing against him, but that's exactly the thing that keeps people drinking, because they don't want to be associated with that. They don't want to be seen as boring. So if you can be someone like yourself, like Andy Ramage that I've come across, I looked at celebrities quite a lot, like Bradley Cooper. How can you tell me Bradley Cooper's boring or lives a
Yeah.
boring life? He's been sober 10 years.
Yeah.
He's done everything he's done. So if you can get sort of role models like that, that can become better men, better dads, better husbands, you know, we need that in society. We need the statistic of young men and middle-aged men committing suicide. We need to try and, you know, find a way around it. And alcohol's often heavily involved.
Oh wow, mate! I've got goosebumps listening to that because that was so powerful. And what that took me back to is I've recently finished a course with Nicola, and I've talked for them at an exhibition in Brighton. I know Josh Conley, Sarah Drage, Kerry Walker, Camilla Tomini, you know, like people that have grown up with alcoholic parents, and I was that parent.
Yeah.
And when I did a talk in a school with Sarah, it was in front of 400 students. And afterwards, the kids were coming up and they were asking me, you know, how can I talk to my dad? You know, it breaks your heart because they don't quite understand it. And the biggest thing that I hear from them is they notice this, the change in them. They become hypersensitive around their parents drinking, where it could be a certain look in their eye or something they do that they just know, oh my God, they're drinking again. And it's scary, you know. So there's so many conversations to be had out there. And it's up to people like ourselves and other role models to keep talking, you know, keep sharing and making this community look appealing and not boring. And it isn't. I mean, look at the boat party with Matt. And unfortunately, you can't make the event that I'm holding, but there's James Vecchialodi there from Death of Anna playing live, Jack from Tova, Jessica Wilde, you know, I've got a magician there, 5 hours long. People are going to remember it in years to come because they're not escaping. You know, why would you want to escape that? You want to embrace all of it.
I feel, especially at those events, like people, you're actually you. Like I was an introvert when I was sober, and I was an extrovert when I was drunk. So I was so confused that when you go there, I came away from that bow party thinking, right, yeah, I'm probably a little bit nervous here, because I went on my own. I was meeting Andy there, and I'd seen a couple of people on social media, but I went on my own. I would never have done that when I was drinking, because I was like, I need a drink to be in front of a social situation.
Yeah.
And then you go to someone like that and you're like, I know for a fact I'm not going to upset anyone. I'm not going to regret anything. I'll probably get a decent night's sleep after this. I'll meet loads of people. And if they don't like me, they actually don't like me. But I'm quite comfortable with that, because at least it's not, oh, they would have liked me if I'm sober, but I was that drunken idiot. So you come away, and we spoke about this before, like walking clean, I think is like the best thing. Like not having to look over your shoulder, not having to lie, remember the lie, regret what you've done, worry about things, cringe when someone brings up a story and you're like, oh God, what's going to come out here?
Yeah.
Not having any of them feelings is the best feeling in the world for me.
It's so like powerful what you said, that is because I've always like compared my relationship with alcohol to like a wild affair or something, because I kept it secret, and at the time it was exciting, you know, the drinking and it was secret and whatever. And then I got to a state, not that I have had one by the way, but it was a comparison that I looked at it like this devil woman that was charming me over every night. It's like, come on darling, you know you want me, you know you want me. And in the morning I regretted all of it. Wake up 4 a.m, sweating, thinking, what have I done? I don't know, you know, has anyone seen this and whatever? And when I actually faced the music and thought, I've got to get out of this toxic relationship, and it's almost like I blocked this mistress from my life. It made me, I'm a very visual person, you know, so it made me see it like the relationship I was having in this like love affair had to end. And that really, really helped me see it like that, because we are in a relationship with alcohol, because it brings you in. It
Yeah.
over intoxicates you into the sort of fake persona that it is, you know, the false beliefs of it will relieve your anxiety when you know that a few hours later you're 10 times more anxious. It will help you sleep. It will make you feel more comfortable in a social environment. There's so many fake beliefs in alcohol. And when you see it for what it really is, you can breathe, you can be authentic. And I don't know about you, mate, but I I know who I am now, and it's completely different from what I thought I was, because I was that loud person going in, "Wee, I'm here now. Yay, Clugs is here. Let's have a few beers." When now I actually think I'm pretty quiet, and I'm quite happy with that, really.
Yeah, I'm exact same, and I think a lot of the football environment did that to me as well. So I think I have been a people pleaser growing up, and I think that comes from my childhood, like not wanting people to argue and trying to keep the peace. And I would I'd want to wear a certain item of clothing. I'd want to listen to certain music, but it didn't really fit with everyone else. So I was listening to stuff that I didn't really want to be listening to. I'd be wearing stuff that I weren't wearing, that I didn't want to wear, just to sort of fit in. But now, and especially like posting stuff on social media, I was always worried. I was like, oh, this is going to make me look a certain way. And now I'm like, don't really care. If someone, wants to talk about this with their mates or take the mic, then I'm absolutely comfortable with it. If I want to wear this item of clothing, I'll wear it. If I want to listen to the music, that's me. And that has literally been like a switch since I've been going alcohol free. It's like I don't really care, because I'm now starting to find that authentic me. And I'm like you, like I never ever I go out and I look for like nice places to go and view a sunset and sunrise and go for nice walks and read books and all this stuff. Like I was almost proud that I didn't read as a footballer. I was like reading books and
Yeah.
going on little walks like that, and that ain't what I want to do. But I found like you have to determine what your own version of fun is. So for a lot of people, it's going out, to a nightclub. That isn't my version of fun anymore, and I'm comfortable with that.
Mm.
Whereas before, it'd be like, oh, this is what everyone thinks is fun, so I've got to go and do it. I've got to go and be like everyone else. But it's like, no, I'm comfortable in going to the gym, diving in the sea at times in the morning, playing with my little girl. These are the things that I value way above alcohol, or way above, what anyone else thinks anymore.
Amazing, mate. And your lovely wife, how are things there? Because
Yeah,
great now. She was a singer in a S Club 8, wasn't she?
she was. Yeah, she was in S Club Juniors, and then they ended up being S Club 8 when they grew up a little bit. But yeah, she's amazing. She's been so supportive. Our relationship now is so much better, because I did become that liability, and I picture her at times like having to keep me up, and how I was in front of her friends maybe and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But she's had to go through a lot, because she's been a new mum, and she's gone through experiences. She's transitioned from becoming this. It's very similar to my journey in football. This sort of superstar at 10, 11 years old up until 15, 16, and then having to come out and go into sort of a more normal job, if you will. But
Mm.
she's actually really picked up with her singing. So she's singing locally a lot and gigging a lot, and that's given her own independence back. I'll have to get her at one of your events soon. But she's also formed a reunion with S Club 7. So she was in Prague last weekend. She's got a gig in Dubai. She's playing Manchester Arena in October. So yeah, it's gone brilliantly for her as well.
Fantastic, mate. Well, look, it's been an absolute real joy for me to talk to you today. I'm so grateful, and I feel really excited to maybe do something together at some point in the future. I think you've received some wonderful news that I think I'm allowed to talk about. I was in the head office of Alcohol Change UK yesterday, and they said you popped in.
Yes, yeah. So you know, I want to give back and work with charities I really believe in, and people that I really believe in the messaging. And yeah, I went in there, and looks like I'll be hopefully doing some work like you've been doing, in the coming months and years. So again, you're someone that really helped me on this journey at different points. So it's been a pleasure to talk to you, mate. And you make it really comfortable for me to sort of let loose a little bit. And it could before be sort of an awkward subject to talk about, and I didn't really want to talk about it, but I actually really enjoy talking about it now. And I think a lot of people get to that stage. And like you said before, if you can say something, and one little nugget of what we've spoken about here can prompt someone to do something or identify something, because it's what really helped me. I'm sure it's helped you go through, but I just think it's so powerful. And I'm looking forward to being part of your live-a-thon next month, and looking for ways that people like myself and you can just change the way that we view alcohol, and change the way that if a young lad goes through life thinking I don't have to do this, or I don't have to do that, or a mum at the end of the working week, or someone in the city that feels that they have to go out and entertain. We just need to change the messaging around alcohol. We're not trying to ram anything down anyone's throat and sit on a high horse. We're just saying, look, we've been where you've been. We know that this is a better way of living. We're not going to force it down you, but if you can start looking and asking questions and seeing the way we're actually being conditioned without realizing it, then it's up to you once you've got all the information. Because I look back at our mums and dads and grandparents, like the education they had was, smoking was good for you. Drinking when you're pregnant is a good idea. Have a Guinness. The education's there for us now. So we just have to try and share it and, open people's eyes a little bit.
Mate, I'm sure this podcast will do just that. You've been amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'll see you on my live-a-thon on June the 12th. Hopefully this episode will be out. But if it's not, then people would have seen it, and it will be on my Instagram as well. So, and let's do something together soon, mate. It's been amazing having you on. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Dave. Cheers, mate.
See you soon, mate.
See you, mate.